Hello and welcome from the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Food Safety. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Food Safety and Private Sector Partnerships. My name is Miha Matejchuk and I'm a PhD student here at Cornell University, and I'll be your MC for today. Before we welcome today's panel, I'd like to direct you to a few of the webinar functions. At the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a chat icon. You're welcome to use it to introduce yourselves. Today's webinar includes a question and answer with our panelists. Please submit your questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer as many questions as time allows. We're grateful to have Matt Gorney from Cornell IT joining us to provide technical support today in case we encounter any technical difficulties. The webinar is being recorded and we will notify you next week when it is available on the Food Safety Innovation Lab website. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Haley Oliver. Dr. Oliver is the director of the Food Safety Innovation Lab and professor of food sciences at Purdue University. Her research focuses on the prevalence, persistence, and transmission of Listeria mydocytogenes and Salmonella in retail food systems and the development of control strategies to reduce cross-contamination. Dr. Oliver is also working to strengthen food safety capacity in Afghanistan, Nigeria, and Peru. With support from Usaid, Dr. Oliver and her Purdue colleagues have developed a food technology program at Herat University in Afghanistan to improve food safety, quality, and security. Since June 2019, she has served as the director of the USAID Feed the Future Food Safety Innovation Lab. With that, let me ask Dr. Oliver to take over and get us started. Dr. Oliver, over to you.
Thank you, Michal, and good morning, afternoon, and evening from Purdue University. My name is Haley Oliver, and yes, serve as the Food Safety Lab Director, and certainly one of the highlights of my career so far. Welcome to our fourth webinar in a series on food safety. And of course, food safety is a very broad topic, and today we're going to focus on the private sector and how really they play a major role in driving food safety. Next slide, please. Now, I will preface to say I am certainly not an economist. Last I checked, I'm a microbiologist, but I have a deeper appreciation all the time for the role that the private sector and certainly economics as a discipline plays in food safety. And the more I think about it, and I know I'm not the first to conclude this, certainly, is that really food safety has a supply and demand aspect to it, and really I think is a fine case study, and of course is driving what is really a relatively new field of study, food safety economics. So when I step away and think about the individuals or the groups that influence food safety, of course we have, I think, the three what most people would say are traditional influencers: the government, the consumer, and the private sector, of course, which is what we will focus on today. But when I think about it too, I added in education, and really education and research, because education does also supply the individuals and the long-term knowledge base that supports consumers' decisions and their knowledge that support government employees, and then of course produces students often that go in to the private sector to produce foods around the world. So next slide, please. I think this is one of the best summaries, really, of looking at food safety, again, from a supply and demand standpoint, and where the private sector fits in. I borrowed this image from the Global Food Safety Partnership, Food Safety in Africa report, which was produced in 2018. And I think, again, it's a nice summary of a push and pull dynamic that we see with food safety. So, kind of a quick look at this diagram. On the left, you'll see that on the pull approach, which is the demand aspect of this supply and demand example, it's consumers. And having consumers recognizing what food safety is, and then realizing that they have an increased demand for it, or what it can do for you if you have increased food safety. On the other side of the equation, or really supply of safe food, is where we see our value chain actors, and certainly the private sector that has the opportunity to respond to demands. And of course, we know that there can be certainly incentives for increased food safety. So the individuals we have here today have a rich history of working from the government side and also from the private sector itself in food safety. And we really look forward to hearing their perspectives on the private sector as they engage with food safety. So our agenda this morning, we have, again, a wonderful array of speakers. Kelly Cormier from the U.S. Agency for International Development, so Usaid, will give an overview. And again, she has an amazing career with Usaid. Howard Pupla from the Kroger Company, Vice President and for Corporate Food Technology and Regulatory Compliance, will address certainly one of the largest retail chains in the United States and their interface with food safety, certainly around the world. Greg Groffy from Land O'Lakes Venture 37 has worked in food safety and development for a number of years and will bring both the private sector perspective, but also NGO and research for development lens as well. Thoric Cedarstorm joins us from one of our sister programs sponsored by USAID. So the business drivers for food safety implemented by Food Enterprise Solutions, to talk about their current work that complements really the research side that the Food Safety Innovation Lab has. So after each of these presentations, we will go into a panel discussion where we look forward to addressing questions directly from the audience. So please place those in the chat. So it's my pleasure, certainly, to introduce Kelly Cormier. She is the Food Safety Division Chief in the Center for Nutrition in the USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, where she leads a team that addresses food safety risks in food systems through technical assistance and global leadership in support of the US government's Global Food Security Strategy and USAID's multi-sectoral nutrition strategy. She is a champion of gender integration and knowledge management with a broad safe food systems portfolio. For 8 years, she worked in the Bureau for Food Security as an agricultural economist. So she is an economist, as I am not, and a division chief for inclusive market development. Prior to joining USAID, Dr. Cormier led an active research agenda that explored how the evolution of policies and institutions that affect agriculture markets and the coping strategies of men and women. She has served as a fellow with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Fulbright Association, and the National Council for Eurasian and East European Research. She holds a PhD in Development Studies with specializations in Economics and Law from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and an MS in Agricultural Economics from Michigan State University. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Haley, for the introduction, and thank you to the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Food Safety for inviting me to speak about this very important topic, and a topic that I've spent a large part of my career thinking about. The vital role of the private sector in promoting food safety to improve diets cannot be overstated, and I'm pleased that it's receiving increasing recognition within the development community. Today, I would like to reflect on how USAID is partnering with the private sector to improve food safety and the importance of expanded food safety investment and capacity to strengthen food safety and nutrition outcomes among the most vulnerable. As we confront the challenge of equitably increasing access and affordability of safe and nutritious foods, I want to take a minute to highlight how we apply USAID's private sector engagement policy, which was launched a few years ago. So this tool outlines a range of both private sector engagement and private sector development modalities in which USAID interfaces with for-profit firms. The private sector engagement modalities can include transactional support, which is when USAID provides direct or indirect financing to support a specific transaction with a partner, mindful not to crowd out private capital. It can include public-private partnerships, which are formalized partnerships with the private sector that involve a commitment of resources from both sides, and it can include informal collaboration. And then on the private sector development side, modalities can include strengthening the business enabling environment for the private sector in a way that drives inclusive economic growth, can include providing public goods, which help to strengthen the broader private sector in our presence countries to facilitate investment by all companies. And it can include working with private sector entities to strengthen their capacities to participate in the market, and with government entities that work on investment facilitation. I wanted to start by outlining this framework so that we're all on the same page in terms of how we think about different ways to engage the private sector. Usaid has prioritized working with the private sector. And today you're going to hear a few exciting examples of what private sector engagement and development look like in support of increased food safety. But first, I want to explain why increasing private sector capacity and investment in food safety is more important than ever. In 2015, the global development community committed to end hunger, food insecurity, and all forms of malnutrition by 2030. And last year, the FAO's State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report concluded that at this moment, we are not on track to meet this goal. The report emphasized the increased need for both safe and nutritious diets to feed the world's growing population. And in fact, the SOFI report estimates that 2 billion people in the world did not have regular access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food in 2019. The report also forecasted that COVID-19 pandemic could tip more than 130 million more people into chronic hunger by the end of 2020, while it highlighted the fact that improving food safety is essential to achieve food security and improve nutrition. Nutrition and healthy diets are only possible, however, when food is safe. Investing in food safety not only saves lives, but it's also essential for the prosperity of national economies. The WHO estimates that every year, 1 in 10 people worldwide become ill from consuming unsafe food, leading to 420,000 deaths per year. And of those deaths, 125,000 are among one of the most vulnerable groups, children under 5 years old. And we have estimates from the World Bank that these foodborne illnesses cost low and middle income countries $110 billion in lost productivity and medical costs every year. These statistics are probably familiar to many of you. And the consequences of poor food safety practices and their impact on nutrition can't be ignored. Diets, we know, cannot be considered adequate or nutritious if they're not safe, and food safety cannot be an afterthought in development. Our increasing emphasis on affecting food safety change stems from a development approach that takes a food systems perspective. And USAID understands that if we want to achieve sustained progress in nutrition, we need to utilize this systems approach, which includes robust investments in food safety throughout the entire food system. And to meet this need, we collaborated with internal and external thought partners to develop a food systems conceptual framework that some of you might have seen. It shows how private sector investment can influence several of the drivers of the food system, including finance, income growth, and infrastructure to ultimately improve the primary outcome of diets. As Food Safety Division Chief in the Center for Nutrition, I oversee a diverse portfolio that tests models for engaging the private sector in various ways to promote improved food safety. For example, the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Food Safety, our host today, focuses on reducing the burden of foodborne disease from chemical and biological hazards through research projects that engage private sector partners in developing market-oriented food safety solutions. In Senegal, the Food Safety Innovation Lab is building food safety capacity to enhance resilience of the dairy value chain and reduce foodborne illnesses in this sector. So dairy production in Senegal is a rapidly growing sector that faces big food safety challenges as a result of a diverse and fragmented supply chain of individual small farms, aggregation centers, artisanal processing facilities, and transport without refrigeration. So this program is partnering with dairy processors and producers, wholesalers, and exporters to raise awareness of food safety issues and their impact on public health, to conduct research-based food safety training programs, and to identify practical food safety interventions, and to coordinate comprehensive food safety regulations aligned with government policies. So this is a really good example of what we can do to work with the private sector to affect food safety change. Another example is the Feed the Future Business Drivers for Food Safety project, which works with micro, small, and medium-sized food enterprises to address food safety risks, particularly in informal markets, and help these businesses become agents of positive change for healthier diets. Thoric Cedarstrom from Business Drivers for Food Safety will discuss this project's work with the private sector a little later in this webinar. So USAID puts a lot of effort into fostering collaboration among food safety partners in order to create feedback loops that facilitate faster learning about what works. This year's UN Food Systems Summit provides an opportunity for the global community to come together and identify evidence-based game changers to build sustainable and nutritious food systems that incorporate key food safety considerations. And while we've made significant strides to elevate the importance of engaging the private sector to promote food safety, there are so many more opportunities for continued partnerships, evidence generation, and global engagement. Appropriate tools are needed to help guide private sector engagement and development in ways that promote safe and nutritious foods as part of a healthy and balanced diet. Both USAID and our partners are currently working to develop guidance and look forward to sharing this with you in the coming months. And I want to end by saying that I am very excited to be on the panel today with the other panelists, including Kroger, to learn about emerging blockchain and food traceability technologies that can be applied in emerging market contexts. Tapping into the growing American trend of sourcing transparency, there's opportunity to use this same technology to improve global food safety. And I'm equally looking forward to hearing from Land O'Lakes Venture 37, an MOU partner of ours, on their important work in the dairy cold chain in Kenya. By entering into a joint venture with Bidco Africa, Land O'Lakes demonstrated their dedication to the East African market, soon followed by the opening of a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to food and feed quality. I'm eager to hear from all the panelists today to share their experiences leveraging the resources of the private sector to promote safe and nutritious diets. And thank you again for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. With that, I'll hand it back to Haley. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And thanks for reminding us of that very intimate relationship between food safety and nutrition. Well put, that without food safety, we will have a very difficult time achieving our nutrition goals. And it's a very daunting number that you offer, the 130 million people that will also be potentially seeing food insecurity as a result of the pandemic, which of course remains a challenge. And we're all doing our part to do some prevention in that space, which of course Food Safety Innovation Lab is working with the private sector and a number of governments in our countries to help the food systems navigate things like employee social distancing and some of those challenges. But I would love to introduce now Howard Pupla, who in his role as the Vice President for Corporate Food Technology and Regulatory Compliance for the Kroger Company based in Cincinnati, Ohio, he has the overall strategic responsibility and direction for food safety, quality assurance, and product development for the entire Kroger Company. The entire Kroger Company, being said, includes approximately 2,800 retail stores, 42 distribution centers, and Kroger's 33 owned manufacturing facilities for dairy, bakery, pet food, and grocery products. Prior to joining Kroger, he led product integrity and regulatory compliance in progressive companies, including Topco Associates, US Foods, Nestle, and Kraft Foods. Howard serves on several boards of trustees and advisory committees, including the Ohio State University Center for Foodborne Illness Research and Prevention, our own Feed the Future Food Safety Innovation Lab, and the Global Food Safety Initiative. Howard, thanks for being here, and over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver. And good morning to all of my colleagues world over. Good afternoon, if it is afternoon where you are, and good evening if you're just getting done with the day. Today is a very important day, and I couldn't thank Dr. Oliver enough for inviting me to participate. Food safety and private sector partnership is very, very important. We are often described as the last mile and the final delivery point for that food from the processors and on to the consumers. And so whatever it is that is gonna happen, oftentimes, breaks out at the retail sector. And we are forced to deploy as much as we can to make sure that the chain of command is maintained from the processors all the way to the consumers. Before I go into my presentation today, next slide, please. I'd like to just interest you a little bit in our company. Barney Kroger started the company 137 years ago. We've got 475,000 associates who work in our retail stores, manufacturing facilities, distribution warehouses, and several offices all over the United States. With 2,800 retail stores, 33 manufacturing plants, and quite frankly, $26 billion in private label business. That $3 billion represents just our Simple Truth organic and better for you label in what has been described as an unprecedented 2020 years. And we've got over 20,000 suppliers, small, medium, large, all over the world that we work with. And it will be interesting to share some perspective today around how we work with those suppliers to build food safety capabilities. Next slide, please. Why is this important to us? If you listened to Dr. Cormier moments ago, she talked about hunger, she talked about nutrition, she talked about how food safety is tied to this. I couldn't agree anymore. For Kroger, we have a moonshot, and that is to make sure that in the communities that we serve, no one goes to bed hungry. So we launched our Zero Hunger, Zero Waste program. This is designed to make sure that the communities that we serve have enough to eat. As we know, not just in the United States, hunger is a social issue all over the world. And that ties to food safety as well. And personally for me, if we're going to be doing that, the very first question I ask is, how could we possibly do it as safe as possible? How could we do it in such a way that, the already hungry people out there, we don't make their conditions worse, by giving them unsafe foods. There's also the opportunity for growth for everyone involved in the chain, from government to producers and processors. There's opportunity for countries to increase their gross domestic product. There's opportunity for producers and processors to make their products available to countries that they've otherwise never been able to ship to. And I'll give you some very good examples here. And this is where, for us at Kroger, this is where we truly, truly get involved. We work with government in some situation to make sure that the standards that they set for food safety is harmonized all across the board. We come in with a standard. There are other manufacturers and retailers as well who come into the same space with different standards. What we've worked with our suppliers on and the government is in making sure that we partner with them for their overall success, while emphasizing the importance of food safety for market penetration. I was on the board of Global Food Safety Initiative, and we had this global markets program that we introduced out to the small and medium enterprises out there. As you know, for us at Kroger, the key to fulfilling the desires of our customers when they come into our stores is making products from all over the world available to them. And so when we find those small niche suppliers whose products we want to put in our shelves, obviously there is a demand on those suppliers to make sure that the products that they're putting together are safe for consumption. We don't look at them and say what you're doing is not right and then turn our backs on them and walk away. We actually hold their hands and we work with them to be able to guide them through food safety certification in order to make sure that we open up those opportunities for them. I'll give you a good example of a situation. we found a supplier of a very niche product out of Thailand. When we spoke to this supplier, they had no food safety program in place. They hadn't heard the word food safety. All they did was to harvest their products and process it and make it ready to be able to ship anywhere you want to go. Well, we told them that's not how it works. We're going to help you to be able to fix that. And we recommended the GFSI Global Markets Program to them. They took the basic course and got certified on the basic program. And then they moved on to the intermediate. And today I'm happy to report that about 5 years after, this supplier has been certified to one of the benchmark standards of food safety by GFSI. It is indeed, a very, very good story to tell. When you find them, when they were nothing, and you were able to work with them to the point of certification. Not only did they become a good partner to Kroger, we had their markets opened up for them to the point where other retailers have now started to work with them. Government too has a role to play in this. Oftentimes, the private partners disagree with the government when it comes to food safety standards, especially in those areas in Africa and in Asia. Government has been known to be very, very laxed when it comes to food safety. And when the private sector comes in with very, very tight food safety standards, it becomes a problem for those suppliers to meet those standards. We continue to work with government to make sure that we're leveraging harmonized standards across the board. The GFSI is in the forefront of bringing together government and businesses to the same table to talk about how we can harmonize standards and make it easy for everyone in the supply chain. We also continue to work with other organizations like the Food Safety Innovation Lab, Food and Agricultural Organization, and several others out there as well on how we can continue to leverage the opportunities that we have as a partnership across the supply chain to bring food safety capabilities to those small and medium enterprise companies. Everyone has to lend a helping hand when it comes to building food safety capabilities. Food safety is a job for everyone, quite frankly. And I couldn't be much more happier that Dr. Cormier threw out all those statistics. Over 450,000 deaths attributed to food safety issue on a yearly basis. We have a unique opportunity on our hand. And I'm sure if we can all come together, public, private, and we put together a very, very sound program, we will be in a very much better place. Thank you very much. And I hope to hear some more questions from you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. I could listen to your perspectives all day. And as someone in my other side of my role here at Purdue that studies retail food safety, I can certainly appreciate the importance of, as you elegantly stated, that the last mile or the last stretch to the consumer. So we spend a lot of time thinking about food safety and your scope and system as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce Greg Groffy as our next speaker, who serves as the Group Director of Design and Technical Services at Land O'Lakes Venture 37. During his time at Venture 37, he has served in both technical and program management roles with purview into broad range of technical areas in agribusiness, including market systems development, food safety and quality, and enterprise acceleration. He brings 20 years of experience in strategy, partnership, and technical design in both financial services and agribusiness industries. Greg is passionate about leveraging the power of markets and social enterprise to create innovative solutions that address development change. Greg, welcome, and over to you. Well, as we wait for Greg to join us, we might be having a moment of technical difficulty.
Apologies, Haley. Thank you for the cue. Thank you all, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here today and be part of this distinguished panel and the opportunity to collaborate with Purdue and Usaid as part of the Food Safety Innovation Lab. Haley, I like what you said at the beginning about being a microbiologist and not an economist. I was going to say, frankly, I'm not a food safety expert and I don't claim to be one, but I am very passionate about the importance of food safety and quality as a vehicle to create impact and change in the work we do around the world. And I'm quite fortunate, to be honest, to be surrounded by a great team of food safety experts, whether they're my colleagues who sit at Land O'Lakes Inc., our affiliate, and our food safety and quality team who work with our manufacturers and processing plants or our supply chains, or colleagues of mine from Venture 37 who lead and implement development programs that I'll speak to a little bit later. I'm also very proud of being part of an organization that has a rich and strong culture around food safety. And what I mean by that is no matter what your role is in the organization, there is an importance, place, and appreciation, knowledge, and understanding of the importance of food safety and the work that we do. First, I'll provide a little bit of background on Venture 37. If you could go to the next slide, please. A lot of people ask about the number 37. What's behind that? Well, 37 is the percent of the world's arable land that's used for crop and livestock production. And we know that that number is relatively static. It's not going to change much. And we know that in 30 years or so, the world's population is going to increase and be nearly 10 billion people. And in order to develop solutions, we'll have to work together in order to make the most of that 37%, so that in the end, we can have abundant, safe, and nutritious food that can help everyone realize their full potential. Next slide, please. Venture 37 has had a long history, 40 plus years, of working with Usaid and USDA and many other partners in over 90 plus countries. And I'll say that the value and expertise that we bring from this in the area of food safety is in large part because of those partnerships and because we have the backing of Land O'Lakes Inc., which is a farmer-owned cooperative with businesses in dairy foods, animal feed, crop solutions, and ag sustainability. And I've used the Land O'Lakes Inc. Farmer to Fork model here as an important lens by which we can look at food safety because it truly cuts across all of these different business areas. Next slide, please. The focus I'd like to bring to today's discussion is really to talk about ways that Venture 37 has helped to bring commercial market-oriented solutions to advance food safety and create local and export economic opportunities. I couldn't agree more with Kelly's comment at the onset about food systems and appreciative of the work that Usaid and others have done in the space to advance thinking around food systems. The schematic I have here is one of the ways we're thinking about food systems and the different aspects to it. And today, I won't have time to cover each of these areas specifically, but I'll use several different examples to tie together the importance of looking at systems to understand food safety impact and to develop interventions that address critical pinch points and create impact within that system. Next slide, please. Some of the key areas we focus on in our work and practice. One is starting with the farmer. There's a lot of hazards, including where and how the food is grown, or dependent on where and how the food is grown, how it is stored, how it's handled. All of these have huge impacts on food safety. So it's critical to look there as one place. There's also importance of increased education, investment, and good practices. downstream from that, a number of different actors ranging from transporters to processors and other business intermediaries. And it's also important to work with them and do things like developing prerequisite programs such as preventative control measures, as well as thinking about how to help businesses be more innovative and develop products that can be differentiated upon food safety and quality. I liked the discussion earlier about creating economic value and how can you do that? I think what Howard was talking about. So these are ways that we do work with some of the businesses, and then the supply chain, of course, is critical. Of course, if one part of that supply chain fails, the impacts are felt throughout beyond the source. And so improving things like traceability requirements and compliance with FSMA are important aspects of maintaining integrity in a supply chain, something that both we do as a commercial business as well as in some of the support that we provide to businesses around the world. As I go through examples later, I'd like for us to think of several guiding principles. The first is, from my experience, there is no blueprint or one-size-fits-all approach. Of course, there are industry standards, there's best practices, but in the end, there's really a need to tailor based on the business, the environment, and importantly, where an organization is in their food safety journey. It's often easy to think about just jumping in and trying to do the work for the business or to look for the most advanced certifications out there and promote those. But our experience has shown overall that incremental steps and progress are sustained the most when you do things in line with where the business is at, and will help get to the end game the fastest. I also spoke earlier about the critical elements of, I'll speak a little bit more about the critical elements of end consumers in the supply chain, and really appreciated Howard's comments earlier. The importance to us is creating win-win partners. And Kroger is an important customer of Land O'Lakes, and one where both organizations collaborate on many things around product, consumer needs, and food safety. And so that idea of working both with your customers as well as with your suppliers around food safety is critical. And this is a principle we apply in our commercial business as well as the work Venture 37 does. And then finally, Howard talked a little bit about the GFSI Global Markets Program. I'll speak a little bit more to that as well, but there are great training programs, tools, and standards out there that one can use. And we found them very important and effective in helping us work with different organizations. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to highlight a few different examples. And I've started with this one, Nourishing Prosperity Alliance, which is an innovative partnership between agricultural firms, international research organizations, and NGOs that is helping to upgrade women farmers' productivity, capacity, and income earning potential in Kenya. One aspect of that, one of many, but important one, is food safety. And I've called out this aspect on this project because when you think about that feed system, and I talked about the producer, importance of the producer, and even input supply, well, this affects both. And we know one of the critical areas with Kenyan dairy producers is the quality and safety of feed that those animals are being given. One is because there's sometimes high levels of aflatoxin in that feed, and it gets carried through into the milk and contaminated milk, and then ultimately into the market. So we've learned through our experiences with this alliance, other work we've done in Kenya, and our past investments in Kenya in animal feed, the importance of mitigating that and using controls with the supply chain as well as with manufacturing to create a safe environment for feed that then translates into safer food. Next slide, please. The next few examples I'll give highlight some of the importance of working with the enabling and policy environment, another part of the systems framework. And I know most of, this is a critical area that we're working in, and in this case, in partnership with the US Department of Agriculture. We have 3 different programs in Egypt and in East African community and in Bangladesh. I'll highlight the Egypt and East Africa examples because we're just starting up work in Bangladesh. But these are focused on working to improve and harmonize standards and practices. In Egypt, for example, we're partnering with the National Food Safety Authority, and we're doing this in several different ways. We're working with the authority to help benchmark standards against codex, regional and international standards. developing policy frameworks that can be clearly communicated with stakeholders. Importantly, using data to drive risk analysis, and then using that data and analysis to develop risk-based, to help organizations develop risk-based standards and approaches that are appropriate level of protection, but also one that are not burdensome to trade and commercial interests. And to tie this all back together to how is the private sector involved, one of the key things that we're bringing to the equation, helping our partners work with, is helping to engage and enhance that dialogue between public and private sectors, ultimately to create buy-in and staying power. In the East African community, we are also working to promote private standards and voluntary third-party assurance programs. We're working specifically in the horticulture sector and bringing global gap to partners with the competent authorities, training inspectors and auditors, and assisting the regulatory authority to use inspection data and to help make verification procedures more risk-based. So there's a number of different things that private sector can do, working in collaboration with government in ways that enabling environment is really critical in order to help support a food safety system in a number of different countries. The last two examples, and next slide, please, that I'll use are collaborations with Usaid. And one I highlighted here is a unique one, and it's a partnership through the Usaid Farmer to Farmer program, where we're working in Egypt, Lebanon, and Bangladesh. We partnered with over 50 businesses, mostly small, medium enterprises. And that support has been primarily through conducting volunteer assignments, where we bring in experts from around the world. A number of these experts are from Land O'Lakes, Inc., our affiliate, who are from their supply chain team, their food safety and quality team, who spend their day jobs working with their manufacturing facilities, working to ensure integrity within our supply chains. And they take that knowledge and apply that on a pro bono basis to support Usaid and the businesses that we're working with in these countries. A key thing that we use in some of this work is the Global Markets Program Toolkit. And I'll highlight some of the, build off of what Howard said earlier, but highlight some of the aspects of that, because I think we found it really valuable. We've also supported academic universities and strengthened, and once again, some of those enabling environment factors, working with educational institutions in those countries and providing joint training on curricula, for example, around HACCP, to increase the capacity of students and food safety professionals entering into that market. Some of the things we've learned from this work is that sometimes the simple solutions are best. So I'm thinking about some work we've done with poultry processors or a honey business, where focusing on some of the basics of sanitation, hygiene, doing some small investments, promoting some small investments. Businesses are the ones who are making the investments, but encouraging those investments in equipment and renovations that really help improve the environment and food safety there. In other cases, it's much more advanced, and proud to work with businesses like we are in Lebanon, a French fry producer in the case of Lebanon, and helping that business increase capacity, make key investments, and not only access more local markets, but international markets, and even to the stage of being certified by the highest standards of global restaurant companies that are now sourcing from that business. So there is a potential to take companies where they're at in the journey, from ones who are just starting on this journey of developing a food safety culture and developing protocols, all the way up to ones who want to create some of that export market potential in what they do. I'll elaborate just a little bit more on GFSI based on what Howard had said and some of the things we found important. One is the importance of, the Global Markets Program is really valuable because you can work with different businesses at where they're at in the journey. So there's a beginner and an intermediate category, basic and intermediate. So this is really nice to use, given depending on where the business is at that you're working with them. Covers so many different areas, including traceability, incident management, measuring and reporting, purchasing, a whole slew of different things that one needs to have an appropriate food safety culture. And it really creates milestones and ways that we have found effective to work with businesses. So can set an appropriate benchmark, see what kind of milestones are being made, and and use this as a leading indicator to then, for businesses then to look at obtaining more advanced certifications and other types of things that will help them grow and increase access to markets. And final slide, please. The last slide and example here is from work that we've done in Rwanda with Usaid. Work in the dairy industry. There was a combination of 8 years of Usaid investment and collaboration, which we carry forward today in additional work in livestock and nutrition there. But I've used this example because it ties together a lot of the aspects that I talked about earlier around a food system, food safety system, and everything from the enabling environment to working with processors to working with primary producers. And this work really encapsulated a lot of that. So just some of the highlights at the policy enabling environment. One of the key things was working with the government and introducing and implementing a first of its kind ministerial order on milk handling and transportation, along with a national seal of quality. And so when this was established, it gave businesses along the chain an opportunity to market and sell and label based on the seal of quality. And 142 million liters of milk went through the system, and a number of different novel products were created that could leverage the seal of quality. We also had to work extensively with the producer level. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of things happened, which included basic practices to reduce bacteria and disease, improve safe storing and handling. And that was critical in order to meet some of the requirements further down the chain. And then finally, tying this together to the importance of consumer education, launching a national dairy campaign called Shisha Wumba, or Feel the Goodness, which was a program done in collaboration with Uranana that helped educate and build awareness within the community about not only safe, but also the nutrition value of milk. So a combination of these things certainly helped increase the amount of milk marketed and sold by over 300% over the life of that project, and helped to increase and build a more sustainable system and safe system within the dairy industry. I'll end there and turn it back over to you, Haley. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Craig. I think you made a great point, a slide that no doubt will find its way into my deck one of these days, but the reminder that feed safety and food safety really are intimately related. And I appreciated that you highlighted that Land O'Lakes is indeed a farmer-owned cooperative. In high school and college, I watched, or on the fringe participated in my father developing a farmer-owned cooperative for dry edible beans. And it's a really difficult process, but really an important way for the private sector to really gain traction and to build a stronger market and eventually have greater control over their income. It is my pleasure to introduce Thoric Cedarstorm. Thoric is the Director for Research and Learning for Food Enterprise Solutions, which is implementing a 5-year USAID Feed the Future initiative called Business Drivers for Food Safety, or as I like to say, one of our sister programs. He is a champion of private sector-driven, market-based approaches to malnutrition that involve both private and public sector stakeholders as active partners. He is an experienced applied social science professional with over 30 years working in primary data collection and analysis using mixed models, program design, monitoring and evaluation, technical assistance, and policy analysis. An expert in sustainable food systems, especially the food, nutrition, and livelihood sector of vulnerable populations. He has served extensively in Mexico, Central and South America, Africa, and Central and South Asia. Prior to joining Food Enterprise Solutions, he worked with the World Food Program, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, Save the Children, Counterpart International, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and the University of Arizona. Over to you, Thoric.
Thank you. Thank you, Haley. It's quite an honor to be presenting today with this esteemed group of colleagues, and I thank the organizers, the Innovation Lab for Food Safety, for including us in this event. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. As Kelly pointed out, and I would like to reiterate, the issue at hand is quite serious. Foodborne pathogens are really an unmeasured risk and hazard that affects the health and well-being of millions of people around the globe each year. The exact dimensions are not quite known. WHO is doing a good job in trying to estimate what is the global burden of food safety. What we do know is that in terms of cost, that inadequate food handling practices do adversely affect the economies of countries, as well as increasing the public health burden, and also contribute significantly to pre-consumer food loss and waste in the overall food system. I'd like to share with you a little bit about what we're doing at Food Enterprise Solutions in our USAID Feed the Future initiative that's called Business Drivers for Food Safety, or we use the acronym BD4FS. It's a 5-year multi-country initiative. We're currently deploying in Senegal, Nepal, and Ethiopia, where we're working to accelerate the adoption of safer food practices in local food systems. We go about this by working with local agri-food actors, growing food businesses, and we engage with them to co-design and implement incentive-based strategies to improve food safety, retain the nutrient content, and mitigate pre-consumer food losses. We use the term growing food businesses, which are small, medium enterprises, food related, that have a desire to grow. So we really emphasize the entrepreneurial aspect of the factors of production. We try to engage with businesses that recognize the importance of safer food handling practices as a core part of their business strategy. So these are our partners that we work with to help them improve their food safety practices. Next slide, please. Sort of our conceptualization of the shared responsibility among the different actors in a food system. Our overall goal of BD4FS is to promote a culture of food safety. And in order to do this, all the actors, primary actors in the food system, need to be engaged, they need to be coordinated, and they need to work together. Our focus is in among businesses that are that we help them by addressing their sort of barriers and constraints while leveraging opportunities to them as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, within the food system, if we look at it in a linear fashion, where BD4FS is focused is from farm forward or post-farm gate to the consumer gate. We recognize, as in some of the earlier presentations, that on farm or in the production area, there's also a great risk of food contamination. And also, once food enters a consumer household, if proper food safety practices are not utilized there, then contamination and food spoilage can occur there as well. However, our programmatic focus is looking at that middle section of the supply chain once it moves off farm and once it until the point where it arrives to the consumer at the retail level. Next slide, please. So along this supply chain, there's a host of risks of food contamination, beginning on farm and going all the way through consumption. Our thinking is, our premise is that if market signals work well and consumers are increasing their awareness of food safety and are demanding safer food, those signals will trickle back up through the system, and you will see a ripple effect up through the system. But generally, we work through the middle section of this graph. Next slide, please. Kelly mentioned the food systems approach developed by USAID, and just wanted to signal where BD4FS works. And unfortunately, in this slide, some of the added on graphics didn't transfer to the PDF. But if you look at the center part, the food system supply and demand, on the supply side, we work on the 3 bottom bullet points: transportation and storage, food trade and distribution, processing and packaging. Then within the middle section, food environment, we're actively engaged in all those issues, from especially availability and affordability, markets and access, also helping businesses promote themselves as the suppliers of safer food. Then the whole issue of environmental health around food safety, water, and water quality. On the food and water utilization, most of our activities would be around assessing consumer preferences and how can increased consumer awareness around food safety support market drivers for that. In terms of development outcomes, where we're really involved, is that we see that the potential outcomes, development outcomes, are that priority foods, and these are perishable, nutrient-dense foods, that contribute to consumers' diverse diets, are, first of all, safer to consume, they're more available year-round, and they're more affordable to consumers because supply chains efficiencies have improved, there's longer product shelf life, and that safe foods can be offered at lower prices. And then finally, the other development outcome is increased transparency, that food products that do arrive to consumers are clearly labeled, and there's more increased choice at the consumer level. Next slide, please. Here are some of the enablers and barriers faced by growing food businesses. Some of the enablers are the shift in demand, increased willingness to pay for safer foods. Some of the barriers are, though, that a large portion of the consumers that we're concerned about in vulnerable populations are price sensitive, and so their ability to pay might be limited. And then among a large part of the consumer population too, there's just a general lack of awareness of food safety and perhaps consumer indifference to it because they have so many other priorities. And then there's other issues facing governments and in terms of businesses, some of the incentives or enablers is that if they embrace a culture of food safety, there could be potential expanded markets for products. We heard the Kroger example, a very clear one like that, where an international business can pull in suppliers from developing countries that have embraced the right sort of standards. This can reduce and increase sales for them, increase revenues, improve safer food practices, can also reduce loss, can reduce their operating costs and improve product appeal. Some of the barriers, though, to businesses are the upfront investment costs and access to affordable capital. Could be a generalized lack of just knowledge around food safety. A lot of growing food businesses have a very mobile workforce, and so workforce development and training has to be it's a recurring cost sometimes. Access to clean water, I would also put here access to affordable energy. And then a lot of growing food businesses just overall, those on the smaller scale just have very thin margins. And so adopting food safety practices that have specific costs, adoption costs could be challenging to them. Next slide, please. So here's our development hypothesis, is where we're trying to mitigate some of the challenges or barriers, but also leverage the enablers or the opportunities. And for businesses, it's can we facilitate access to affordable financing? Can we support them with capacity development to put into place safer food handling practices? And this includes technical support and also technical support on product development, new food products that can meet this changing demand among consumers. Next slide, please. This is just really quick, our process of BD4FS, how we roll out. We have a discovery process, which includes a food safety situation analysis, background research. We've currently done a food safety assessment or a situational assessment in Senegal. We're getting ready to do one in Nepal. Once we understand sort of the issues and the players and the regulations and sort of the landscape of food safety in a country, we enter into a co-design process with the businesses themselves, these growing food businesses that have a positive attitude towards food safety, and they see it as an integral part of their business model. And then we actually began to, with them, implement and to observe what are the changes, what are the challenges of that. We document that. And then our final process is sharing with a broader community, other businesses that will be attracted to the initial businesses that have entered into this process. Next slide, please. So the business case that we present is that the derived value of food is that it's the benefits of safer food handling practices minus the cost, these costs that we outlined before, and that really consumer expectations have evolved almost at a global level, where with rapid urbanization, with a sort of growing purchasing power that we're seeing, people want, consumers want foods that have good taste, that are convenient, that are affordable, and that they're safe. And we see secondary considerations that people want food that's healthy, that's nutritious. They want to know that it's been sourced or produced in ethical ways. And they want to know that that food has been produced in an environmentally responsible and sustainable way as well. So we think that our experience is that there are businesses in the developing world context that are very much interested in this business case and that are moving in this direction. Next slide, please. So to move towards safer food practices, we realize that for a lot of growing businesses that are operating within thin margins, that embracing a full sort of HACCP standards would be impossible. But there are stepwise actions that could be taken in this journey towards greater food safety management. And we've branded this as cool and clean, the essential actions for safer food, because we recognize that temperature control and handling of food is critically important, as well as the sanitation side of it. And these two axes form these sort of focal set of activities that we're actually doing with businesses. Next slide, please. So our research agenda right now is trying to understand the dynamics of what can be done with individual businesses that will contribute to this overall culture of food safety at the national level. So we're seeking to understand what drives growing food businesses that operate in both formal and informal markets, and how can they come to adopt and sustain food safety practices. So some of the specific questions that we're looking at is to what extent can consumer awareness of food safety and consumer willingness to pay for safer food influence investment decisions of growing food businesses. We're looking for case studies of how some individual businesses have been able to already surmount their business challenges, that are already leaders in their countries without any sort of external support. These would be considered as positive deviants. They're somehow leaders already without any sort of interventions. We're also interested in looking at both the formal and informal sectors and the differences between business models, those that are formalized and those that are in the informal sector, and how the differences between them affect their willingness to accept and to implement food safety practices. Next slide. There we go. One of the other areas we're looking at are what are some of the key elements in the enabling environment, such as financing, improved infrastructure, technical support, clear rules and regulations, how these also are they barriers or enablers to the uptake of safer food practices and technologies. Also very interested in the impacts of government enforcement of food safety standards, rules, and regulations on growing food businesses, whether they're positive and negative. We know that, as was mentioned before in one of the other presentations, too lax is not good, and too severe or draconian is not good either. And so where's that middle ground that really incentivizes and supports businesses to uptake safer food practices? And then we're very interested also in the market linkages, and can the export sector and can markets that are more profitable, catering perhaps to a growing middle class, how can these be tapped into to also increase the supply of safer foods to domestic food markets? And I thank you very much. I think that's my last slide.
Thank you, Thoric. It's really nice to hear from, again, one of our sister programs, and we'd like to highlight that Eat Safe and Bonnie McClafferty as representation is also joining the webinar today. So I'd like to move directly to the panel discussion, and we have a number of questions that have come in from the audience, and we're glad that you're able to stick with us as we move into this always very interesting part of our webinars. I'd like to start off by directing a question to Kelly, if I might. And because of her vast experience in development and at Usaid, I'd be curious to hear what are, in your opinion, some of the most profound or really memorable examples of a Usaid-supported private sector success story.
Thank you, Haley. Well, and then thanks to all the panelists. I learned a tremendous amount from listening to all of these examples. So I guess I want to start by saying that I think that the answer to your question was in part already provided by some of the panelists. There were some excellent examples, not just of USAID supported project activities, but of other private sector development and engagement examples. So I have a couple of thoughts. One is, I want to reflect too on, there's an attend, I noticed in the participant list, we have a representative from the Alliance for Inclusive and Nutritious Food Processing, which is a longstanding public-private partnership that Usaid has enjoyed with Partners for Food Solutions. We've learned a lot from that. And I just wanted to point out one piece and then get to my second point, which is the model for that work, which has relied on technical assistance from U.S. companies, largely General Mills, Cargill, more recently Hershey. They have in East Africa developed a model for supporting food processing companies to deliver, to improve their food safety capacity. One of the things that we learned over the years is that finance was a constraint to developing small and medium enterprises. So I just wanted to point out that as we think about what are the successes, a lot of we need to be paying attention and learning from these experiences. But I guess that brings me to my second point, that what is a successful private sector development example? What does that look like? I mean, I think one of the things that all of the panelists talked about, it's beyond that one company. We're talking about thriving industries, and thriving domestic industries would be a measure of success, because those thriving micro, small, medium enterprises in informal and formal markets are what's needed to ensure affordability and access to safe, nutritious food year round. I think it's that vision that I'd like to put out there to this to the audience and to the panelists. So how do we get there? The panelists included language like food safety culture, which again is an industry concept. It's a business concept, but it's also something that we need industries to adopt. And when we think about industry, and Haley, you started us off by providing that typology. It's who are the stakeholders? Well, they include everybody from the businesses themselves to the government stakeholders whose actions are essential to providing a supportive, enabling environment, to consumers who are demanding food safety, and then to the educators, as you said, who can inform policy and consumers as well. So I'm not really answering your question, but I really do believe that you heard some excellent examples, and I want to end this response by offering that the Global Food Safety Partnership Food Safety in Africa report that I think, Haley, you referred to in the beginning, there's one section in it that outlines some of the findings from a private sector roundtable that took place as part of the assessment in East Africa. And one of the findings still stands out to me. And so I'll end by sharing that, the researchers, and I think Corey Watts is also in the audience, who was one of the co-authors of this report, found that companies were saying, we want to hear from consumers. We want to hear from the people who will be buying our foods. That's an important relationship, and it's one that's missing in many countries. So I think, what does a successful private sector development project look like? I mean, if it yields scale, affordability, contributes to competitiveness, and builds trust along with high expectations of consumers, I think that we've got it. So my response is general, but I'd love to hear from some of the other panelists. Thank you.
Sure, and I'll leave it open for a moment if anyone wishes to add on to those comments. I don't see any mics coming off of mute, but I think it does lend itself to a question that came in from the audience, and I'll restructure it a little bit. But the comment is, many people want food safety, but most producers and manufacturers can't afford the cost. And the example was given for testing, but the costs are significant at many levels, from sanitation programs to equipment that has sanitary design. And really, what are some key recommendations? And we have a lot of people that can address this to someone who sees those as cost barriers. What are some options or solutions or strategies they might take?
Dr. Oliver, I'd like to take that. One thing that I've found, that has worked very, very well is local groups coming together, finding corporations who do business in those areas, who utilizes those raw materials in producing their own final product, coming together and trying to elevate the food safety in those areas come in very, very handy. In GFSI, there is a GFSI local group for each region. And GFSI has leveraged this local group, frankly, consisting of manufacturers like Nestle, Kraft, who have Land O'Lakes, who have operations overseas, in those areas and countries where, those small and medium enterprises have found it very, very difficult to transition over from their traditional ways of manufacturing or producing food to the modern day, leveraging those organizations, bringing them to the table and using them to support the local groups has been a very, very good way that has helped my company in those areas that we wanted to work with local suppliers and we were challenged from it. We found out that if Kroger, Nestle, Kraft could go forward and ask a supplier to invest in doing some work around food safety, and in turn, we would invest in their business. We will commit to 5 years of sourcing from them. We found out that it's worked out very, very well.
Thoric, over to you.
Yes, I would just reiterate what Howard said, as the value of these international lead firms that are looking to extend their supply chain into countries around the world. And they work collaboratively with their partner companies that are located in these countries to upgrade their technologies and to change their practices and perhaps underwrite that initial cost barrier to there. I think there's also a critical role of government to invest in infrastructure. Energy is a reliable, affordable energy in Africa and other parts of the world is a critical constraint. And so you could be a food processor, but you go to flip on the switch in the morning and there's no electricity or it blacks out or whatever it is, or it's just simply too costly, right? And so Power Africa, the USAID initiative, I think is a good example of taking the forefront, and changing the cost structure of energy and coming up with decentralized energy systems, I think is critical. Then the access to affordable financing. There's a real role for the international finance organizations to rethink how they allocate financial resources and how can it be made available to these growing food businesses that want to, again, upgrade. They want to do things right. They have the entrepreneurial spirit and the vision, but yet they have these real barriers that they're facing. So there's increasing access and looking at blended finance and impact investors and social impact investing. There's a combination of things that could be done around the financing side. I'll give my colleagues.
Hey.
Go ahead, Greg. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Just to add a little bit to what's been said already, I fully agree. Investment in the supply chain is critical, and I saw a good question coming from Ahmed about supply chain, about food waste, and supply chain investments are one of the key ways to reduce that, catching things early. So that's critical. Certainly, there's standards that exist and are non-negotiable for end consumers for different markets and so on and so forth. But what I like to think about in a lot of the smaller businesses we work with is, I said it earlier in my presentation, is that journey and thinking about those incremental small steps that one can make and invest in, because I think those become the proof points and building blocks for a lot of small organizations who may raise their hands and say, look, we've got, we can't afford that. So building the business case early on, starting with those very initial types of investments, which don't always have to be large. You can have a long laundry list of things that could be done, but narrowing that down to really a couple of critical ones that are doable, and start there. We found that to be very effective way to engage and overcome that barrier that we so often hear, from businesses and others.
And thank you, Greg. And that's exactly the question I wanted to pivot to, was Ahmed Kaplan from USAID's question on really the interface of food safety and food loss. I tell a few people, there's a number of disciplines that I would restudy if I wasn't going to be a microbiologist, or at least in pathogens. It would really be in spoilage, because preventing food loss is one of the keys to our food security challenge. But the question is, food safety is closely linked with food loss and waste, and global estimates show that food systems contribute up to 1/3 of global human-based or human-derived global greenhouse gas emissions. With that in mind, what role do you see the private sector contributing to reducing food systems' impacts on climate via improving food safety? I think that's an excellent question for this particular panel. So anyone jump in, feel free. No, I guess
I could.
Feel free. Go ahead, Dork.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah, one of the areas of program we're looking at is this issue of environmental health in the workplace. Sometimes we refer to it as WASH for business. But in a lot of these informal sector businesses that are handling food and moving it downstream, sometimes they're just transporting it or holding it, but other times they're also processing it, and there's just a lot of byproduct, a lot of waste. And so how that waste is handled and how it is managed and disposed of. So we're very interested in improving the health, the safety of workers, in the work environment. And there's been a lot of attention on that in the United States recently with COVID and exposing the issues in the meat packing and meat processing industry in the United States. And it's not dissimilar, in the developing world context as well, the challenges there. And so rather what we're trying to do in this space is also, is there an incentive to improving WASH, environmental health in the workplace, and especially is there an opportunity for upgrading, upcycling some of the waste products, into inputs for animal feed, inputs for other sorts of things. So those conventional waste products don't go into the environment, but find another alternative economic use. And I think that's a real growth opportunity. Over.
Feel free, Greg. I think you might have some thoughts on
Yeah,
this.
the thing I'll add in addition to what I said in the comment box around, catching things early. I mean, to me, that's critical in investing in your supply chain so that waste doesn't occur farther down and all the energy and emissions are spent on value addition in a product that ends up, being contaminated or unsafe or unfit, so on and so forth. The other example I wanted to tie to this is one I mentioned earlier, some of our work in Kenya with animal feed and feed safety and food safety. So, similar principle applies there. We know that, animal source foods are critical for nourishing a population and will remain a key part of diets around the world. But we also know that they contribute to emissions and gas, but the solutions lie within making that more efficient and system more efficient. And part of that is around the feed that goes into the animal and also the practices around that. And so once again, if you have unsafe feed, improperly used feed, you're replacing it with alternative practices. All of those things have worse impacts on food loss and emissions. So once again, it ties together. This ties together into the overall food system, and thinking about those points very early on, producer level, input supply level, will help us get to a better place.
Dr. Oliver, I'd like to piggyback on that. When you look at non-food safety related recalls, the numbers are on the rise due to mistakes around, packaging. Maybe front label is different from the back label, and producers are forced to have to issue withdrawals for those items. Now, what happens to those items? At Kroger, we're actively taking a look at our non-food safety related recalls so that we can control our waste to landfill situation. We're looking at the opportunity of being able to take those products because they're perfectly okay, nothing wrong with them. So we are partnering with Feeding America to make sure that those products are diverted to Feeding America and they can go into those homes of, those 1 out of every 5 children that goes to bed hungry in the United States.
Thanks for that, Howard, and that's an excellent point. We do have a number of recalls in the U.S. as developed as the food safety system is, to protect public health. There's always some opportunity, especially at that waste, at the waste interface. We had another excellent question come in, and I think it ties. We have a host of experience of Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI, here on the call. But the question is, in view of globalization of our food supply and the need for harmonization of the food safety standards, what initiatives currently exist or are being taken? And I think we have a lot of experience again on the call on this, and GFSI might be one of those fine examples.
Oh, absolutely, Dr. Oliver. Over the last 5 years or so, GFSI has made harmonization of standards a key point in its overall strategy and through the Consumer Goods Forum as well. GFSI recognizes that the true way to breaking through and understanding how this could be channeled is to have harmonized standards across the board. And so the mantra, once certified, accepted everywhere. And they have also worked with government. Earlier on during my presentation, I talked about G2B. We just finished a series of webinars where, government regulatory authorities in several countries are brought to the table along with producers and processors to come talk about the importance of harmonizing standards. It makes it easier on the farmers, it makes it easier on the processors, it makes it easier on the producers if everyone knows that the standards that obtains in this country is acceptable in another country. And while it might be very, very difficult for country A to align with country B, or at least allow GFSI, who's an independent body, to come in between and say, you know what? We deal with everyone all across the planet. And these are the standards that we all agree to. The day we're able to harmonize standards will be a very, very great day for food safety.
Go ahead, Greg. Yeah.
The thing I would add to what Howard said is, the importance of using data and science to drive some of those standards and to use risk-based assessments. So too often we see, non-tariff trade barriers come in place or arbitrary placement on, a variety of different products and standards that aren't risk-based and that aren't based on science and data. So starting there as a key point, I think that's where, research, private sector, public sector dialogue all have a place to contribute to that harmonization process.
Thanks, Greg. Thor, we are at time. If you have one brief comment, feel free, and then I'll wrap us up.
Sure, I would just add to this in agreement, that there needs to be movement towards global harmonization of standards to ensure the free flow of food resources. Same time, I would build on what Greg is saying, how these standards are rolled out and developed, and how the private sector is engaged with those, taking into context the barriers and the constraints and the challenges, especially smaller businesses that are in the developing world context. And if it's not done appropriately, then it's seen as an imposition. It could be resistance. There could be gaming. As businesses seek to evade. It's cheaper to create food fraud or to do things like that. And it's not unique. Europe, United States, we have those sorts of issues as well. So how standards are developed, and are there standards that are stepwise, that smaller scale businesses can start this journey towards greater compliance and greater adherence to international standards, but in a way where they see that, oh, there's benefits, right? If I change my practices this much, I'm seeing these benefits accrue to me, right? Reduce food loss, increase market share, better revenues, healthier employees. And then I'm willing to invest some more in the next stage and eventually migrate towards food standards that are evidence-based, as Greg says. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for your comments. Thank you to everyone who joined us today on the panel, and certainly our very large audience from across the globe. We really appreciate you taking the time to attend our webinar. This recording, again, will be available next week, and we certainly invite you to join our 5th webinar, which will take place next month on April 27th, where we look at behavior. And I think we've heard a lot about behavior today, as it sits really in the middle of all of the stakeholders. We have this human behavior component, and we look forward to having some experts from around the world actually address what we can do and what is being done in that space. Thanks, and stay well, everyone.